So tonight we'll go through uh, as many of the laws of Rosh Hashanah as we can get through, and then if we need more time, we will continue next week. If not, move on to Saras Tshuva, 10 days of repentance, Yom Kippur, and then Sukkot. There's a lot to get to, so we'll do as much as we could in the time allotted. Okay. So when we're discussing the laws of Rosh Hashanah, probably the main thing to keep in mind is the laws of shofar. The blowing of the shofar, that is the only mitzvah daraisa, that is only a biblical obligation, and therefore a person should do everything in their ability to hear the shofar and make sure they fulfill the mitzvah. Just on a practical note, if anyone will be homebound, or you know anyone who will be homebound and needs someone to come to their house to blow a shofar, I would be happy to do it, or we can find someone else to come and blow the shofar for them. Okay. We'll also have multiple.
Also a shofar blower, Rabbi. So if you need people in my neighborhood, I can come.
Thank you. We'll also have. We will also have multiple blowings, in shul, after shul. So indoors, outdoors, we'll try to cover all our bases. Okay. So just to discuss some of the laws of shofar, and if anyone has any questions, please feel free to stop me and ask questions. Okay. So first of all, what is the mitzvah of shofar? What is a person obligated to do? Right? What is a person obligated to hear when they listen to the shofar? So the Torah says that basically the Torah says, or the way we extrapolate what the Torah means, the Torah says to blow 3 times, and that's to blow a trua 3 times. We'll discuss in a moment what that means, and then also we deduce from the psukim, we deduce from the verses that every trua is supposed to be preceded and followed by a tekiah. So therefore, basically what the Torah tells us to do is to blow tekiah, terua, tekiah, tekiah, terua, tekiah, tekiah, terua, tekiah, 9 sounds. The problem is that we don't know exactly what trua is, and if you look in the Gemara, there's basically 3 opinions what a trua is. It's either what we call a trua, 9 short sounds, or what we call a shvarim, which is 3 somewhat longer sounds, or both of them together, a shvarim followed by a trua. And therefore, just to cover all our bases, even the Gemara says that we do like all of them. So we blow, we refer to as 30 sounds. You can look at it as 30, you can look at it as 27. But basically, we blow tekiah, shvarim, tekiah 3 times, tekiah, trua, tekiah 3 times, and tekiah, shvarim, trua 3 times. And that is the minimum that a person should hear, right? So you can look at that as 29 sounds, or you can look at it as 30 if you look at the shvarim, trua as 2 separate sounds. There's a custom to blow 100 sounds over Rosh Hashanah. It's not an obligation. That's just an additional idea. There we count the shvarim and the trua of the shvarim trua as 2 separate sounds to get us to the count of 100. But that's the basic obligation that a person needs to hear. Again, tekiah, shvarim, tekiah 3 times, tekiah, trua, tekiah 3 times, tekiah, shvarim, trua, tekiah 3 times. That's the minimum that a person has to hear. Therefore, if a person's only going to be in shul for part of the time, so they can come, if they can come for the original shofar blowing, that would probably really be the best. You come for when we start the shofar blowing, and then we say the brachos, and then we immediately blow those 30 sounds, and then you have fulfilled your obligation. Ideally, a person, if possible, and people have families and people have different obligations, so not everybody could always be in shul for the entire time. But if a person could be there, there is a custom to hear 100 sounds, and that we don't do till the end of Musaf. After Musaf, then we do the additional, the last blows. It's different customs how we break it up. Most places, I believe, will blow 30 blows right in the beginning, 30 blows during the repetition of Shemon Esrei, and then 40 after Musaf. In our shul, we actually blow 30 during the silent Shemona Esrei as well. We take a break during the silent Shemona Esrei, and then we blow the additional blows then, and we only do 10 after Chazar shots. But all the customs are acceptable customs. They're all valid customs. That just happened to be the custom of our shul, and therefore that's what we do, but they're all valid customs. Before we blow the shofar, we make a bracha. We make actually two brachos. We make the bracha of l'shmoa kol shofar, to hear the sound of the shofar, and then we also make the bracha of shachianu. This is done usually by the person blowing the shofar. Sometimes if he's already heard the shofar blowing and he's blowing for other people, he could ask one of them to say the bracha on behalf of everybody. But if not, even though he's said the bracha, he can say it again for the people who are listening. So if a person comes and hears the two brachas from the Baal Tokeh, from the person blowing the shofar, and then the first 30 sounds, they have fulfilled their obligation. It is very important though, like anytime we make a bracha, and once you make the bracha, you should not pause. There should not be any talking from the time you make the bracha until you finish doing the mitzvah. So if you're only going to hear the 30 sounds, so once you hear those 30 sounds, you've fulfilled your obligation, and now you can talk. If you plan, ideally, like we said, you should stay till after Musaf and hear all 100 sounds. So ideally, you should not talk until you hear all those 100 sounds, besides obviously for davening, or anything that is necessary for davening, or anything that's necessary for the blowing of the shofar. All that could be said, but besides that, you shouldn't say anything else. I was once in a shul, and for whatever reason, the shul did not have a page number sign, and as in many shuls on Rosh Hashana, we get people who are not in shul the rest of the year, and therefore I spoke to the rabbi of that particular shul about it. But I suggested that if we don't have a sign which has the page number, especially if you have a lot of beginners or a lot of people who are not in shul, so even though we've heard the shofar, so we shouldn't be talking, but to announce the page numbers, that's part of the it's necessary for the davening, especially for these people, and therefore that's what we went ahead and did. It's I guess it's somewhat questionable whether that's absolutely necessary for the davening, especially because we already heard the original 30 sounds, and you have people in shul who won't be able to follow otherwise. So therefore, we made the decision to go ahead and do that and make those announcements. But besides for that, a person should ideally not talk at all. In general, we shouldn't talk in shul, but especially when it comes to the shofar blowing, a person should not talk at all, because that could be a hefsek. But at the very least, for the first 30 sounds, which again, we blow them and we say the bracha and we blow right away, there should be no talking at all. One very important halacha, especially for someone who's not going to be in shofar the whole time. Let's say a person misses the original shofar blowing. They miss the original 30 blasts, and then they come to shul in time for Shemona Esrei, or in time for Chazar shots, for the repetition, or in time for the blowing after the shofar. So there's still going to be an additional 30 sounds, which is enough for them to fill the mitzvah, but they haven't yet said a bracha. So in that case, they should say the bracha on their own. It won't work if you're in the middle of Shemona Esrei, but if you get there in time for the repetition, so you plan ahead a little bit, and as the chazan's finishing that bracha, as he's getting up to the shofar blowing, so you find the brachos in your siddur, you say the two brachos to yourself, and then you listen to the blowing of the shofar, and then you could fulfill your mitzvah with the 30 blasts that are done during Chazar Shashatz. Again, here it's a little longer because we don't blow all 30 blasts right in a row, but you can fulfill your mitzvah with those 30 blasts. But again, you have to be very careful not to talk from the time you made the bracha until you hear all 30 blasts. in this case, again, the Baal Tokeh already said his bracha before. He's not going to say it again for the repetition. But if this is when you're going to fulfill your obligation, you should say the bracha for yourself. If a person heard the shofar, had in mind that they want to fulfill their mitzvah, and they fulfill their obligation, and they didn't say a bracha, so you've still done the mitzvah. You wouldn't go back and say a bracha afterwards. But ideally, a person should make the bracha before. And like we said, if the chazan's already said it, so then you can just say it on your own. Again, 2 brachos, the Shema, Kol Shofar, and Shechianu, and you do that as close to the shofar blowing as you could without. You have to make sure you get it in before he starts blowing, which is another important halacha, that in order to fulfill the mitzvah, you have to hear the entire sound. You have to hear the entire sound. That means from when he starts blowing the tekiah until when he stops blowing the tekiah. He starts blowing, let's say it's tekiah gedola, so he blows it for 20 seconds, 30 seconds, however long the Baal Tokeh can do it for. Even though you only need to hear tekiah only needs to be 4 or 5 seconds, if even that. But if the Baal Tokeh blows longer, and you want to be yotze with that blowing, you have to hear the entire sound. So if you listen to 4 seconds of the blow, which is enough to be a tekiah, but he's still blowing, and you walk out and you don't hear the end of the sound, you would have not fulfilled your obligation. However long he blows for, in order to be yotze the mitzvah, in order to fulfill your obligation, you must hear the entire sound. Same thing would be if you walk in late. If you walk in late and you miss the beginning of the tekiah, you miss the beginning of the blow, even if you hear enough of the blow to be counted as a blow, so he blew for 10 seconds, you only heard the last 4 seconds or 5 seconds, that would not count for you, and you'd have to hear that sound again. Okay. Any questions on that before we continue?
No, that's fine, Rabbi.
Okay, good.
My wife doesn't have any questions too. You must have explained it really well.
Thank you. Okay. If a person, for whatever reason, is not sure whether they fulfilled the mitzvah or not, so then ideally they should hear the shofar again, but they would not make a bracha. Okay, there's a lot of other halachos that go into the blowing, but most of them are only necessary for the person blowing the shofar to know, and hopefully that person knows what he's doing. So we'll leave it at that.
Well, the obvious question is, does he?
I hope so.
Hope, Rabbi.
Huh?
Hope is not what we want to hear.
Well, I'll have to have a talk with him. Make sure he knows.
Okay.
Okay. Women are technically not obligated to hear the shofar because it is a time-bound mitzvah. So therefore, if a woman, for whatever reason, can't hear the shofar, she hasn't done anything wrong. It's a time-bound mitzvah. However, women do try to come hear the shofar. They still get a mitzvah for hearing it, even though they're not obligated. They could still make a bracha, even though they're not obligated, at least according to the Ashkenazic custom, Sephardic custom. Women would not say a bracha since they're not obligated. But again, women do try to do, and even if there's a woman at home who, for whatever reason, can't come to shul, we'd be happy to find someone to blow the shofar for them.
The question then, of course, is who makes the bracha when you go and blow for a woman, let's say?
So ideally she should. If she can't, then the person blowing could make the bracha for them. Yeah.
It's not considered a bracha levatola for the person who's blowing. He has in mind he's saying it for her.
Right. Exactly. Yes. In general, when a person makes a bracha for somebody else, if a person is not obligated to, a person, let's say, already fulfilled the mitzvah, they can still say that bracha for somebody else. Same thing would be by Kiddush. If you made Kiddush already, then someone walks into your house who hasn't yet heard Kiddush, you're allowed to make Kiddush again for them. This is a concept that's known as Arvus, which comes from the longer phrase of Kol Yisrael Ravens, that we're all responsible for each other. And therefore, if I've already blown the shofar, but you haven't heard the shofar, so not only are you obligated, I'm obligated to help you perform the mitzvah. So therefore, even though when we say a bracha, we say Asher Kiddushanu Mitzvosa V'Tzivanu, right, that you have commanded us to do this mitzvah, and technically at this point I'm not commanded, but because of this concept, Kol Yisrael Ravens Alizah, that we're all obligated to help each other out and help each other fulfill the mitzvah. Therefore, for any mitzvah, if I've already fulfilled the mitzvah and you haven't, I can make the bracha on your behalf. That would be for shofar. That would be for Megillah. That would be for lulav and esrog. I can make a bracha for you. If you, for example, you don't know how to make a bracha, any mitzvah, any bracha on a mitzvah, I can make for somebody else if they haven't yet fulfilled their mitzvah. Yeah, it's a good question. Okay. If Rosh Hashana falls out on Shabbos, obviously we don't blow on Shabbos. Another important thing to keep in mind, especially if you own a shofar and you blow shofar. So in general, blowing a shofar on Shabbos and Yom Tov is a malacha. It is a forbidden act. It's only a rabbinic forbidden act, but it's still prohibited. I know we have some people in our shul who don't like when I say it's only rabbinic, because rabbinic is still a obligation. We can't take rabbinic obligations lightly. So it is a rabbinic obligation. It is a rabbinic, prohibition. In general, I'm blowing a shofar. If you're blowing for the sake of the mitzvah,
isn't it a Torah obligation to listen to the rabbis? Isn't it a midaraisa to listen to midrabanan?
Yeah, so that's actually it's actually a machlokas between the Rambam and the Ramban. Whether we count the rabbinic obligations as biblical mitzvos. They discuss this in Sefer HaMitzvos, that when we get to a count of 613, do we count rabbinic mitzvos as biblical mitzvos, because the Torah tells us we have to listen to the rabbis. Yeah, so we definitely have to do it. There's no question. But so in general, blowing a shofar on any Shabbos or Yom Tov would be a malacha, would be a rabbinic prohibition. Obviously, if you're blowing on Rosh Hashana for the mitzvah, obviously you're allowed to blow the shofar. But it's important to keep in mind that even though Rosh Hashana, we blow the shofar, still, if you're blowing a shofar on Rosh Hashana, is still technically a rabbinic, it's still a rabbinic malacha. And therefore, if you're not blowing for the sake of the mitzvah, you shouldn't blow. If you're practicing so that you can blow, that's also okay. That's also considered a preparation for the mitzvah. But for sure on Shabbos, you cannot blow the shofar at all. Shofar would be muksa. But even on Yom Tov, even on Rosh Hashanah, if you're not blowing either to practice or for you to fulfill your obligation, or for someone else to fulfill obligation, you shouldn't just pick up a shofar and blow it on Rosh Hashanah, right? My kids always, whenever they see me with a shofar, they like blowing the shofar. So that would be okay, assuming that they're not making too much noise and bothering other people. But that would be okay during the week. But on Rosh Hashanah, just to let a kid play around with the shofar, that should not be done. And again, even for yourself, if you're blowing for somebody, that's okay. But just to blow for the sake of blowing, to exercise your lungs, that would not be okay. Even to practice for the second day, ideally that shouldn't be done, because that would be considered preparation on the first day for the second day. To practice for today, so then that would be okay.
When we blow for the people at Hillel Lodge,
yeah,
and now, so it's not going to be this year, but in hopefully in the future, we
right.
go to each of the floors, we go to the dining rooms.
Right.
The question is, in some of the wings, how cognizant the people are. So do we say that that's just for no purpose, or do we say that, yeah, it's for a purpose, they might not understand, but we're doing it so that they should hear the mitzvah?
Yeah, it would definitely be better if at least one, if you can get at least one cognitive person in each time you blow. But if you don't know whether a person is cognizant or not, then meaning let's say you go to one of the floors and the person who you're supposed to be voting for is sleeping and is not going to wake up even if you blow the shofar. The Rambam says the shofar is an alarm clock telling us to wake up. Let's say the person's not going to wake up and there's just a non-Jewish aid, then you should probably skip that floor. But yeah, if a person is there and you're blowing for them, you're not sure they're going to hear every word, they're not going to hear every word, because you're blowing to try to help them fulfill the mitzvah, then that would definitely be okay. You don't have to really worry about that too much. Yeah. In terms of the bracha, that could be more problematic. So if you come to a floor and there's a person who's perfectly cognizant, and he hasn't heard the shofar, go ahead and make a bracha for them if they can't make the bracha. They can make a bracha, even better. But if they can't make the bracha, you can make a bracha for them. If you come to a floor, you're not sure, is anyone even listening? Can anyone hear? Is anyone going to pay attention? So then you can still blow, but better not to make a bracha in such a case.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions on that? Okay.
I'm good.
Okay. Just some other laws of Rosh Hashana. So first of all, there is a minhag, there's a custom on Erev Rosh Hashana, before we get back to Rosh Hashana itself, of doing hataras darim, of annulling vows. It's a little bit of a tricky thing without getting into all the technical details, but it's more of a custom than actually serving as a proper annulment of vows. Meaning, if a person actually made a vow, and they don't specifically mention Ad Hataras Darim, they just do the classic version of the Hataras Darim, the classic text of the annulment of vows. Then and they have a vow that they want to annul, it's better to come back afterwards and annul that separately. The whole custom, on some level, I'm not going to say it has no halachic status, but on some level is more symbolic, right? If you think about it, in Erev Rosh Hashanah we do Hataras Nedarim, and then Yom Kippur night, probably the most common night that people come to shul, we have Kol Nidrei. It's also basically the same thing. We're asking to annul all the vows, which is it's a separate discussion. Maybe we'll have to talk about in the future why we do that, why there's such a focus on the annulment of vows, both on before Rosh Hashanah and on the night of Yom Kippur. But either way, again, it is a custom. It is proper to do it. A person should do it. But in terms of actually relying on that to annul vows, that's something that we shouldn't do. In general, only men do it, and women not do it, especially because they're not usually in shul. If a wife wants, she can ask her husband to have her in mind when he does his annulment of the vows. Again, not necessary, but if a person wants, then they definitely could do that. If they're going to do that, then the husband should mention before he does his Hataras Nedarim that please have my wife in mind as well. When it comes to, even though Hataras Nedarim is done in front of 3 people, and even though normally if we had an actual court, so there's certain laws about who could be on the court, who can't be on the court, and for example, relatives shouldn't be on the court together. When it comes to this type of court, it's much more lenient. Shulchan Aruch says even if you have, let's say, 2 brothers who are serving as your Beis Din, as your court, then that would be okay. This year, we're actually heading into Shemitah, and there is a yeah. So there, according to most opinions, we're not. You don't write a principle now. A principle is during Shemitah, all loans are canceled. Now, most people who lend people money don't want to cancel their loans, so therefore, the Chachamim felt that this was something where we needed to find some kind of loophole. Otherwise, it would just be too hard for people. Either they wouldn't lend money when they could, or they would collect the loans anyways, and therefore they put in this loophole. Now, the cancellation of loans only takes place at the end of Shemitah. So it's the end of Shemitah. That's when the loans are annulled, and therefore, according to most opinions, you would only write the principle, which is this loophole, how the loans don't get canceled. We'd only do it at the end. I just mentioned it now because there are people who have the custom either to do it now or to do it now and to do it next year. So if you hear someone doing it, there are people who have that custom, but again, the general custom is only to do it next year, and that's why we'll save it for next year. Okay. Other customs, just to mention briefly, there are people who have a custom to fast on Erev Rosh Hashana until Chatzos, until midday. Not an obligation. There are people who have that custom. If a person wants to do that, they could, but again, certainly not an obligation. Some people also have a custom to go to the cemetery on Erev Rosh Hashana. Kind of puts you in that mindset. This is the day when our life and death is being decided. But again, a custom, not an obligation. And also more popular custom that to go to the mikvah on Erev Rosh Hashanah and Erev Yom Kippur as well. Last year, because of COVID restrictions, the mikvah here was closed, and therefore we relied on a second best option, which was that to pour 9 kavim of water over yourself. This can be in a continuous flow. This could be accomplished by taking a shower. We calculated last year, I think it's approximately 5-6 minutes. If you have, obviously it depends on your water pressure, but a normal shower, it's taking a shower for about 5-6 minutes, and it has to be a continuous flow. So therefore, you just have to make sure not to make sure at least some part of your body is under the water for that entire time. And that would be a second best option. I don't know. I asked Rabbi Teitelbaum whether the mikvah will be open this year, and he's going to check and get back to me. So I don't know whether it'll be open. If it will be open and a person feels comfortable going, again, it's a custom, it's not an obligation, then we can go to the mikvah. If it's not open, then we could rely on the second best option, again, of just taking a shower and fulfilling the obligation in that way. Okay. When it comes to, all right, you know what? I think we'll stop here. We still have some other things to discuss. We have Tashlich to discuss, some of the differences that we do in davening, candlelighting, Kiddush, Shachianu, but I think we'll stop here for tonight, and we will pick up there next week.